Hello, you're welcome to today's Bible study of the Banking Blessings Ministry. Today we are we're presenting the first of two Bible studies that deal with settling family dispute. The wonderful testimony of Jacob's life presents us two opportunities to learn two different methods of settling family dispute. The other one we will deal with next Bible study. But today, let us look at this interaction between Jacob and Laban. You remember last time that Jacob and Laban made an agreement regarding how the proceeds of the animal rearing that Jacob will be taking care of, how the proceeds will be shared between both of them to pay Jacob's wages. They implemented the agreement successfully the first time, but subsequently they found that certain details were not defined. Jacob felt that he was being cheated. In fact, he reported that Laban changed the rule 10 times on him, trying to force him, trying to find a way to get the better of the shares. But one thing we learned before we proceed, one thing we learned from that story is that Jacob actually persevered. If, as a good apprentice, he felt that he was being cheated, but he didn't take off and leave. He stayed with his master, knowing that the one thing an apprentice has to do is to be loyal to his master, to perform according to the agreements. And he did that until God told him that it is time to leave Padan Aram. Then we know what happened last time. Jacob packed up, consulted with his wives, and then they packed up one day and left without telling Laban. So when Laban came back, he wasn't happy that Jacob left. Of course, he wasn't happy with how wealthy Jacob had become relative to him, Laban, who used to own everything. So he packed up his relatives and pursued Jacob. So we'll see what happened when he caught up with Jacob. What we're going to learn today is really that Laban and Jacob came up with an ingenious way to solve the dispute, to settle the dispute between them. Initially, they tried pursuing the truth, but they soon found out that in a family, you cannot settle a family dispute by digging for the truth. Instead, they came up with an ingenious way to prevent or to reduce the possibility of future disputes between them. We will look at this. And of course, when Laban was going after Jacob, he took his relatives. This gives us an opportunity to look at an organization that is set up on ad hoc basis to help mediate relationship, to help regulate relationships between families. And that organization we refer to in the Banking Blessings series as the Council of Relatives. We'll talk about this more. And during the interaction between Laban, Jacob, and the Council of Relatives, they shared food. We'll talk about the significance of this. Everything we're going to discuss today is in Genesis 31, verses 19 to 55. We'll start with what happened when Laban realized that Jacob had left. The people came and told Laban and said, Jacob left without telling you. He wasn't happy about that. So he also realized that his daughter Rachel had taken, he didn't really know who took it, but the Bible told us Rachel had taken his father's household gods or statues without his father's consent. So the fact that the gods were missing was one of the things that Laban wasn't happy about. The most important is that he wasn't happy about how the relationship between him and Jacob progressed up to the point that Jacob left. So he collected his relatives and went out after Jacob. Let us read about this in Genesis 31, verses 19 to 23.
Genesis chapter 31, verses 19 to 23. Verse 19. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. So he fled with all he had, and crossing the river, he headed for the hill country of Gilead. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead.
So Laban and his relatives caught up with Jacob. And Jacob and his people had traveled for about 7 days, the Bible said, and then settled in the hill country of Gilead. They set up a tent and were resting, had a lot of people and a lot of animals, so it was a gradual journey, even though it was called running away. The running part of it is that he did not inform Laban. An important thing happened here. While Laban was asleep, God appeared to him and tried to calm him down about what was going on between him and Jacob. Basically, the Bible says God told Laban to not bother Jacob. To be careful what he was going to say to Jacob or what he was going to do with Jacob. So the following day, Laban called his relatives together, Jacob called his own relatives. At that time, Jacob's relatives were just his family, his wives and children. And they all gathered to hear the reason why Laban pursued him. Let us read about this in Genesis 31, verses 23 to 25.
Genesis 31, verse 23. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him, and Laban and his relatives camped there too.
Then, after the relatives gathered, Laban presented his case. First, he talked about the fact that Jacob left secretly. He wasn't happy about that. Then he said Jacob carried off his daughters like captives. Jacob was married to them, but he felt that he should have been given the opportunity to send them off, kiss them goodbye, so to speak. But he said he wasn't given that opportunity. And that was basically his complaint, that Jacob left without telling him, carried off his daughters and grandchildren. And why did he not give him the opportunity to celebrate? That he said, "Look, Jacob, you've been with me for a long time. I should be able to be given the opportunity to celebrate the end of your stay. So the way you are living is not good." Well, understand here that Laban didn't really say the main bone of contention. Remember, all along he and his children were not happy that Jacob was getting very wealthy. And he felt, Jacob cheated him, but he didn't really, that wasn't what he presented at this at this meeting of his relatives and Jacob's relatives. But let us read about this interaction in Genesis 31, 26 to 30.
Genesis 31, 26 to 30. Then Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done? You've deceived me and you've carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of tambourines and harps? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. I have the power to harm you, but last night the God of your father said to me, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?
So Laban made his case, and again is that he was denied the opportunity to say a proper goodbye to his daughters, to his grandchildren, and to Jacob, who had been with him for so long. He said, in fact, look, that he had the power, the strength, the physical resources to harm Jacob, but that he wasn't going to do that. One of his reasons is that God cautioned him against taking such actions. And then, of course, he reminded, he accused Jacob. He said he and his family stole his household gods. Honey, you have something to say about this, don't you?
Yeah, what comes to my mind as I read these scriptures, or this portion of the scripture, is God's faithfulness. The God that we serve is the God of covenant. If you look at what Laban said, he said, when he said to Jacob, the God of your fathers, the God of your fathers. So Jacob is actually reaping part of the blessings from his fathers. The good things and the covenant that Jacob's fathers, Abraham and Isaac, had with God is what is flowing onto Jacob. He was running away. He had no means of defending himself against the might and power of Laban. Laban said, I have the powers to do you harm. But the thing that stopped Laban was God himself coming in defense of Jacob, coming to protect Jacob. It might look to the common eye, to a lot of us that, but what Jacob did was not good, or why did he run away? We are not here to judge. God is a God that keeps covenant. Even if it's not for what you have earned, for what your fathers have done, the blessings that accrue due to what your fathers have done. So this is remarkable that God is a God of covenant. And Jacob may have been thinking, I'm running away, I'm doing this, but God has been there all the way, protecting him.
Remember, just to add to what my wife said, remember Jacob's encounter with God at Bethel when he was leaving Canaan to go to Padan Aram. That's when God promised to fulfill in him the promise that he had made to Abraham and to his father Isaac. Yes. But that was a few Bible studies ago. Today, let's continue. After Laban had made his case, now Jacob had an opportunity to reply. Jacob started softly and said, look, he was afraid that Laban might withhold his daughters remember Jacob was married to Laban's two daughters. So he said he was afraid that maybe Laban would not let him take his wife and children away. So the only way to prevent that from happening was, get out when Laban wasn't watching. But he was not happy that Laban accused him of stealing Laban's household gods. In fact, Jacob didn't know that actually Rachel did take these things. But he believed that this was an outrageous accusation. And the first thing he did was he told Laban, say, okay, you go and look for whatever it is you think we stole and see if you find it. And if you find it, whoever you find it with, we're going to punish. Let us read about this in Genesis 31, verses 31 to 35.
Verse 31. Jacob answered Laban, I was afraid, because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find anyone who has your gods, he shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me, and if so, take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the two maidservants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle, and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent, but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, Don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period. So he searched, but could not find the household gods.
Then Jacob had won something. He was accused of stealing, or a member of his household was accused of stealing. He told he told Laban to go and look for whatever it is he thought they stole. Laban actually searched everywhere, searched thoroughly, but he could not find, even though he came very close to it. Then Jacob continued with his case. He said, Look, I served you. Remember, here he was talking to Laban, he was talking to Laban's relatives, and he was talking to his relatives, his wife and children. He said, I've served you 20 years, 14 years for your daughters, and 6 years for your flock. That is 6 years during which they implemented the agreement that they had on labor and wages. He recounted to the relatives, his men, he went to the heart of the matter. He said, Laban changed his wages 10 times. That is, Laban tried to cheat him. Then he said that if it wasn't for his God, the fact that God was with him, that Laban would have let him go empty-handed, because Laban did everything he could to cheat him. Let us read about this. It's in Genesis 31, verses 36 to 42.
Yeah, honey, before I go to that Bible passage,
yes,
I wanted to, I was just thinking about, again, the relationship between Jacob and Laban. You see, it's interesting that Jacob was thinking something else, and Laban's response was something else. Jacob said, I was afraid. In other words, he was afraid of reprisal from Laban. And that's why he sneaked out with his family. That's why he didn't tell Laban. Meanwhile, in Laban's mind, it was, you didn't even give me the opportunity to say goodbye. You didn't allow me to bless my children. You didn't. So there is a disconnect. Jacob was second guessing what Laban would do. And that's what drove him into his actions. If he was sure that Laban was going to say, okay, you guys, I bless you, go in peace, he probably would not run away. So, and what is what caused all this? Lack of transparency in a relationship. Whenever you're having a relationship, you have to be transparent as much as possible, as much as the Holy Spirit allows. You have to be transparent, because if you're transparent, then there's no need to second guess, and that's very vital in relationship between two people. At whatever level of your relationship, transparency is very important, because transparency will breed trust, which was lacking in this relationship.
That's very true, because you remember at what point that the transparency began to get lost between Laban and Jacob. It was when the first time they implemented their business agreement, everything looked okay, but thereafter suspicion grew as things, because Jacob was looking for ways to protect his interest. Laban was frustrated. Every now and then he come and change the rules, and so the suspicion grew, and they became less and less friendly, and of course the transparency began to get lost at that point.
So we're reading 31
Genesis 31 verses 36 to 42. Yes.
Verse 36. Jacob was angry and took Laban to task. What is my crime? He asked Laban. What sin have I committed that you hunt me down? Now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the two of us. Verse 38. I have been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in daytime, and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. 41. It was like this for the 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you.
Last night he rebuked you. So you could see a simple in this attempt to settle dispute by presenting the case and trying to find the truth. Laban, even the simplest one that had a physical evidence, the so-called gods that were stolen, that Rachel took, his daughter. Well, he couldn't find it. He couldn't prove it. He knows it was taken. He believed it was taken by one of Jacob's, a member of Jacob's household, but he couldn't prove it. Then look at the encounter with God. Laban had one account. Jacob considered it that God rebuked him. Look at the simple fact of what happened during the years that Jacob was working for him under their business agreement. Who was right, who was wrong? Laban was changing wages, as Jacob reported. Laban was not happy with what was coming out of the whole thing. So Laban realized something very important, and I think this is one of the things God wants us to learn from this passage. Laban realized that trying to dig for the truth was a waste of time. He realized that after all, this was, even though there are 2 different families now, that this is really his children. And he acknowledged this. He said, look, your wives are my daughters. Your children are my grandchildren. Even your animals come from my flock. As the Igbo people of Nigeria will say, it's the same water boiling in the pot. How can we quarrel? So let us make a treaty. Let us find a way, reach an agreement, so that we will not quarrel in the future. This is a very important lesson, that what is important is not how you settle the quarrel that existed, but what you can do to reduce the occurrence of future quarrels, future disputes. And that is what Laban focused. That was basically his proposal to Jacob in front of his relatives and Jacob's relatives. He said, let us make a covenant to serve as a witness between us. Let's read this in the Bible, Genesis 31, verses 43 to 44.
Verse 43. Laban answered Jacob, the women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. Yet, what can I do today about these daughters of mine, or about the children they have borne? Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us.
Jacob agreed. He set up a stone heap and they prayed that God should be their witness. They prayed that God should accept the settlement that both of them had accepted. And of course, Jacob promised, Laban made him promise that he will not mistreat Rachel and Leah and will not take any wives beside them. Then the stone heap will become a boundary between them, that Jacob should not cross from his side to Laban's side to attack Laban, and Laban should not cross from his side to Jacob's side to attack Jacob. Let us read the details of this in Genesis 31 verses 45 to 55.
Verse 45. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He said to his relatives, gather some stones. So they took stones and piled them up in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar Shahaduta, and Jacob called it Galeed. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. That is why it was called Galeed. It was also called Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me. Laban also said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is this pillar I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home.
Wonderful. So Laban proposed a settlement that is based on setting up conditions that will prevent or reduce occurrence of a dispute between him, his people, and Jacob's people. They didn't try to go back and find out, who did what and all that, because they found they couldn't. Even the simple thing he couldn't find. And it's not because there's any special weakness with him. That's just the way it is. In our society today, it is like that. When there is a dispute within a family, it is better to find a way to prevent future disputes and reduce emphasis on trying to prove who was wrong and who was right in the previous dispute. So they settled through a peace treaty. Let's look at an important aspect of this, that everything they did was in the presence of their relatives. Laban brought his relatives, Jacob brought his relatives, and this forms what we have given the name of Council of Relatives. It is the same thing. A similar thing exists in several cultures, but among the Igbo people of Nigeria, it is called Omunna. Whenever there is a dispute that crosses family boundaries, that involves several families or one or two families, then the Omunna, the council of relatives from the various families, were convened And usually there isn't a written rule as to who can be a member of the council of relatives. At times it is age limited. They said all those above a certain age. At times it's a selection of representatives of the various families, maybe 2 from each family or something like that. But it is an ad hoc representatives of all of the families involved that comes together and they are convened when they are needed to settle disputes, to perform marriages. We remember when Jacob married the 2 daughters of Laban, the council of relatives performed the marriage. The same thing when Isaac married Rebekah, that's Abraham's servant, went to get Rebekah. The same thing, the relatives were brought together to perform the marriage. So the council of relatives, one of the things they do is perform marriage. They celebrate events of family significance. Another important aspect of the council of relatives is the sharing of food. That has a significance. But before we go there, honey, you have something to say about council of relatives.
Yeah, it's very interesting that the responsibilities of the council of relatives. Yes, it's an ad hoc arrangement, but it's something that has been set up by blood. It's a relationship that comes by blood, by being related. Laban took his relatives, and these are blood relatives. Jacob had his relatives, his wives and children are his relatives. And what is important here is that in a family setup like this, relatives do have a duty, a responsibility to one another. From what my husband was saying here, they settle disputes, they perform marriages, they celebrate events of family significance. These are responsibilities which we should not deny one another, because God has put the solitary into families. These are some of the reasons why God created families.
Yes.
If for any reason you are found wanting in executing that responsibility, it is really something that you have to answer to God someday. Know that it is a responsibility that I had no hand in choosing, because you didn't have a hand in choosing who will be your brother, who's going to be your sister, who's going to be your cousin. These are things that have been arranged by God. And whether you are in good terms or not so good terms with that relationship or that relative, you have a duty that is expected of you. Whenever such a duty comes up, you should do it as unto God, because that is a God-given assignment. Oftentimes we find that relatives try to sabotage events or ceremonies of their other relatives that are not. They use it as a weapon to get back at somebody. We have to understand that that's not what God wants. We have a duty. I have a duty. Just like a father gives out the child, the daughter's hand in marriage, a relative has a duty to be a witness.
Yes.
And when that is being asked for, you have to be there.
Yes.
Not so much as because of the person, but because that's what is expected. When relatives are quarreling and you find that I can mediate in this quarrel and settle it, don't say, oh, well, what is in it for me? Oh, don't find excuses. Do it as unto God. So it is very, very important that the Bible has shown us the importance of relatives and their responsibilities in families. Yes. Laban could have gone alone. Yes. Why did he take his relatives? It is quite significant that he took his relatives. Yes. He didn't go to call the army and say, oh, I need protection from Jacob. He took his relatives.
Yes. And they followed him. As you rightly pointed out, God created us to do these things, and I believe that this information was included in this Bible passage so that we could learn about it, to understand some of the practices in our place today, in our various cultures. God created family members to help each other. And one of the responsibilities that family members were given is that when there is something of significance, that the relatives have to gather and share it. If it is something good, enjoy it together. If it is something bad, find a way out of it, comfort each other. That is the role of relatives, and this is emphasized. In fact, in verse 37 of the passage we read, Jacob said, look, you have searched my things. If you found anything, put it here in front of your relatives and mine. Emphasizing there the fact that the relatives were in witness. An important thing that happens, that also we found in this passage, in a number of places we said, we were told they ate food. Why is it important? I mean, eating, you will assume that when people gather, they will eat. Why should the Bible, that has very little room to talk about details, why is that detail included? That detail is included because sharing food has a significance. Think about what happens when people share food. Is that everybody is willing, every participant is willing to accept a little less so that other people may get. And that accepting a little less is equivalent to, it's like preparing a plate of food and giving to the other people to share, because you have given up something that naturally you would have claimed belonged to you, giving up some of it, some of what you would have got naturally, so that other people may get. This is the principle of sharing food. And why does it breed goodwill? If you remember what Christ said in Matthew 25, when he talked about the blessings that come to you if you provide one of the 5 basic needs. The first one he mentioned was food. I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. So when there is a pot of food available or a supply of food, and as you are taking it, you are thinking about all the other people that are taking from it, and you are taking enough, trying to leave something so that the other people may get. You are in fact providing food to those people, even though you didn't cook it. So sharing in it, every person, every participant in a sharing is providing food to all the other participants. And this is how sharing food breeds goodwill. And this is one of the reasons that in this passage, I believe this is one of the reasons that the fact that the shared food was emphasized in each, at least 3 places in the story. So during any gathering of the council of relatives, and it happens today, one of the things that they do is they provide food. Of course, one reason for providing the food is because they are hungry and they like to eat. But a more important reason is that by sharing food, they are sharing goodwill.
Yeah, honey, if I can say something here again, as you were just speaking, I had a witness in my spirit. Yeah. You know, communal eating, sharing food, is like communion. It's like communion. And if you remember, one thing that, Christ said, do this as often as you can.
Yes.
In remembrance of me.
Yes.
You can't share food with somebody that you're not in good terms with.
No.
You can't share food with somebody that, you have not regarded as being in one with you. Yeah. That shares the same principle, the same belief, the same things that you do together. Yeah. You really cannot share that kind of communal food with them. Yeah. So it's quite significant that when brethren come together, it's a kind of communion.
Yes.
And another thing is that when you are taking communion, God said, if you remember that one thing is for you to repent and release everybody that you're holding in unforgiveness. Yeah. Release them in your mind so that you don't eat condemnation unto yourself.
Yes.
So it's very important for people to eat heartily and relax and enjoy themselves. It means that goodwill is being spread. You know, I have nothing against you. I wouldn't eat from the same dishes with you if I'm not in good terms with you.
Yes.
So it's remarkable that sharing food while bringing goodwill is a sign of communion.
Yes, it is. It is indeed, and it's something. It's important to know that something that appears so small, so little, actually has so much significance.
Yes.
Share food whenever you can. Sometime in the future, we'll come back to sharing. But I thank God for this opportunity we have today from the wonderful story of Jacob to talk about sharing food and its significance.
Especially after a settlement.
Yes.
It's very important.
Yes.
You seal it with a communion.
Yes.
Especially after a settlement.
Yes. Well, we've almost come to the end of this Bible study, and Laban and Jacob, this interaction between Laban and Jacob help us see an approach for settling family disputes. Do not insist on proving faults, because you can go forever and may never satisfactorily prove the faults. That is left to the courts, and this is a way of settling dispute without going to court. So what you have to emphasize is something that you can do at your level, and not the things that the courts have to do. And even when people go to court, after they are done, usually they are not satisfied with the fault finding, any kind of fault finding. So stay away as much as possible from finding faults. If you want to look back at what happens, it should be from the point of view of helping you understand what it is happened, so you can set up an arrangement to prevent it from happening in the future. So focus on finding ways to prevent future disputes. That should be the main interest in settling a family dispute. And today we also learned about the council of relatives, the positive role they play in moderating inter-family interactions. Honey, do you have another remark before we?
No, it's just that it's been quite interesting how the Bible deals with every day-to-day needs and details these things out. And we hope that as many as have listened today, that these Bible studies, will bear fruit in their lives. I personally have been blessed.
That's wonderful. I'm happy you said that, because that's a very good end to today's Bible study. We'll pray that those that are able to go through the information that we post on our website will be blessed the way that we have been, maybe more than we have been, and that whatever they learn from this will make a positive impact on your life and bring you closer to God's purpose for your life. Thank you very much, and God bless you.